Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway.
Welcome back to Paris History, Avec Hemingway, and today we're talking about the area surrounding the Pantheon. And you may know this area because it's super close to the Luxembourg Gardens, but Claudine's going to teach us all about it.
Yeah, the Pantheon is the Latin Quarter. So it's just if you're standing in front of the Pantheon, you look right down, you can see into the top of the Palais de Luxembourg, and you could even see the Eiffel Tower from up there. So it's a really great little spot. And if you have only been walking around it, you haven't gone inside, you should definitely go check it out, especially if it's a really hot day in Paris, because going down into the basement is freezing, even in the middle of a heat wave. It's a great place to go. But the Pantheon itself, a lot of people get confused because they think of the Pantheon as Rome, but this is the Paris French Pantheon. In 1774, Louis XV traveled to Metz. It was during the siege, and he became very ill. He had a high fever. He was treated by bloodletting, which was something that they thought cured everything back then, for 12 days. And he told he had 2 days to live. So Louis XV prayed and promised that if he survived, he would build a church to Saint-Geneviève. And we have done 2 episodes about Saint-Geneviève. So we have talked about some of this before, but this we're going to give you even more great information. But it wouldn't happen in his lifetime. So he did survive, but in his big promise that he made, it took until Louis XVI to actually do it. Before Louis XV, another king made the same vow back in the 6th century. Clovis, who was king of the Franks, was married to a very devout Queen Clotilde. Clovis went off to the Battle of Tobaillac and made a promise and a prayer to the god of Clotilde. Clotilde was very religious. Clovis was not. That if he survived and was victorious, he would convert. He went to Notre Dame de Reims in front of all of his soldiers, and he was baptized. Clotilde was really close to Saint-Geneviève about that time. She was just Geneviève, and persuaded Clovis to build an abbey on the top of the hill known as Mont Locotito. Luco, I'm totally butchering that, but it was dedicated to St. Paul and St. Peter. When Clovis died in 511, he was buried in the abbey. Geneviève was buried next to him when she died shortly after. Clotilde would become Saint Clotilde, and Geneviève, of course, Saint Geneviève, because she's the patron saint of Paris. And it was because of Clotilde that we know the story of Saint Geneviève. And there's a beautiful church that's really close to the Rodin Museum that is the Saint Clotilde, which I just was in just yesterday. In the 9th century, a new church was built here under Louis XIV. It was destroyed, leaving a perfect place for the church to be built that Louis XV wanted. Due to the wars and Louis trying to control the purse strings of France, it was put off until 1757. The Marquis de Marguigny drew up the plans. He was the brother of Madame de Pompadour, who was the great love of Louis XV that we did an episode about. But he drew it up, but then gave his protege, Jacques Germain Soufflot, he told him to come up with this. On September 6, 1764, Louis XV was there to lay the first stone, but never saw it finished. He died 10 years later in 1774. De Soufflot and Marguigny were inspired by the Roman Pantheon, of course, with its Corinthian columns and its, all of its ancient Greek design. Soufflot he worked on it in 1780, and his partners took over finishing it after he died. In 1790, they dedicated it and designed it to be a Greek cross style church. So a Greek cross is basically when it's like, the same size. So if you look like at the letter X and just turned it and had it straight up and down, that's basically a Greek cross. Most churches that you see look like a cross, like that Christ died on that shape of a cross, but this is a Greek cross. On April 2nd, 1791, when the revolutionist Mirabeau died, it at the Assembly Nationale, the National Assembly, Emmanuel Pastoral decided that they needed a monument built to the heroes of and the great men of France. So on April 4th, it was decided that Port Saint-Geneviève was going to get booted out, and it was changed to the Pantheon as the resting place for the great men of France.
As it
It was
should
very
be. Just
Port Saint-Geneviève. Poor thing. But you know, she found a place close by. He was the first one that was buried there, but 3 years later he was removed when it was discovered he had secret dealings with Louis XVI, even though he was a revolutionist. So the guy that had her booted got booted himself.
I mean, rightly
Really.
so.
I know, right? Exactly. Under Napoleon, it returned to the name of Saint-Geneviève, but it still remained the crypt of great men. And in 1816, it returned to a church. In 1819, they removed the golden letters, eventually redoing the pediment and the remains of all the markings in 1823. In 1837, the pediment was given a new design by David D'Angers, and the former version included victory surrounded by the allegories and genies. And it's really cool when you look at the top of it. It's a beautiful building, especially in the morning with the sun coming up behind it. It's really gorgeous. It stands in between liberty and history. It's standing in between the allegory of victory in the middle, who's writing down the names of the great men. On the left, Mirabeau still there, but also Lafayette, David and Félion, but also Voltaire and Rousseau. They are also on the top. There's also Napoleon and some of his soldiers up there. Inside it, Saint-Geneviève remains still sort of. She's on the walls. When you look on the outside, one of the cool things is you might notice some of the stones are like a whiter color. That is because, and you could kind of, when you really look at it, you could tell the shape of it, because that is what used to be stained glass windows. And those stained glass windows were removed when they stopped it from being a church dedicated to the great men. They took all the stained glass out and bricked up the whole entire outside structure. And now they have these huge murals that go all around the inside of it. Half of it is dedicated to Saint-Geneviève and shows the different parts of her life. But there's also ones about Clovis, Charlemagne, Saint Louis, and Jeanne d'Arc. The Jeanne d'Arc ones are some of my favorite. And then as you walk out the door, there's one of Saint Denis that is picking up his head that is rolling away.
I mean, that's like something to really catch your eye, I feel like.
It is. It's definitely. And I have people that are like, did he really carry his head? And I'm like, I'm just reporting the facts.
Not our word.
But it is really cool. Inside it, it last November, almost a year ago, it made, a lot of people, especially in America, found out about the Pantheon, because that is when Josephine Baker was symbolically interred. She was not herself moved there, but they put a box with a few chunks of dirt from the 4 places she had once lived there. But down, you also have Pierre and Marie Curie there. You have Simone Weil, who's one of the greatest women in French history. They should have Rose Valland in there. I got to talk. Give me the line to the president.
You need to call somebody.
I know. I got to talk to Macron about that. But they also have a bunch of the people that fought in the liberation. But they also have Victor Hugo, Emile Zola, Dumas. They all are in the same crypt. And I always just think, like, what kind of conversations are they having? Their egos are probably so big that they're probably arguing.
Love it.
But it's a really cool space to go into and go see the crypt. Once in the crypt, you kind of like, they all look exactly the same. You go to look at the different people, but I see every time people go down there, once you're down there for like 20 minutes, it's kind of like the catacombs. Like, once you see a stack of bones, do you need to keep seeing it for 2 kilometers?
See them all.
You see them all. But it is really cool. And so poor Saint-Geneviève, when she got kicked out of there, she was only there for a very short period of time before they kicked her out. She ended up going over just right behind it to the church that is the Saint Etienne du Mont. This church, a lot of people know this church because it's what they call the Midnight in Paris Church. The current church was begun in 1494. It was finally finished in 1624 and was still continues to be worked on. It was dedicated to Saint Etienne, who's Saint Stephen, who was the saint that the very first church in Paris that was on in front of what we know as Notre Dame today. It was the very first church in Paris. It was Saint Etienne, so that's what they dedicated to Saint Etienne. Over the central part of the door, the tympanum is by Gabriel Jules Thomas. It is a martyrdom of Saint Etienne, which it's kind of like it gets the name Saint Etienne, but it's no, I mean, most people just know this as the Saint Geneviève Church. The lower level, the front door, has beautiful Corinthian columns that are top with a pediment that's like a Greek temple. It's a really, really cool church. What was right next door to it was the abbey that Clovis and Clotilde had built, and it was the Abbey of Saint Geneviève. And there's nothing remaining of it today except for the tower. So when you look at that, and it's now a school, it's a really prestigious school. You see a tall tower in the middle of it. That was the only part of the Abbey of Saint Geneviève, and it literally shared the wall with the church. So they could actually go in between it from that side. Once you go inside of it, the biggest thing that is the most notable and what I love to take, I always take people inside the church. I show them the steps from Midnight in Paris. Everybody wants to see that, but then I make them go inside too, because inside the church, it's gorgeous and it's very different from any church in Paris. The biggest and most notable part of it is the Joub screen, or the rood screen. It's the only one left in France. Most of the churches in Paris had these, including Notre Dame. It was built between 1530 and 1535. And it is basically, it's a screen that kind of goes behind the altar. This one is carved out of marble. And the reason it was stayed in place was because you could see through the bottom. The bottom has these kind of Gothic arches. But most of the churches like Notre Dame and Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, they were all like an actual wall. So it separated the choir from the nave, from the people. And so they thought, well, we want to open this up and bring the people together more. If you recently watched the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, when she went through, because of how they seated everybody, when she went through, there's still one of those screens. So the people in the back, they don't see anything. They can't see anything really up past it. So that's kind of was, I've thought, oh, great. This is where people could maybe see how these things work. But the one in Saint Etienne is gorgeous. It's all carved out of marble. It has staircases that go up, or that curve around and go up the side. It's absolutely stunning. The Joub comes from the Joub Domaine Benedictaire. It was designed to bless the people. They used to actually stand up above it and give their sermons. The steps on each side take you to the second level where the priest would stand, and there was even a higher gangway to walk. They don't use it anymore. I would love to be able to walk up there. It separates two styles, the flamboyant and the Gothic choir. So the front of the church is flamboyant, the back is Gothic, and it's the French Italianate style as well that goes back to 1605. So you have, and it's really a bright church. It's very, it has a lot of light coming in. Some churches are darker, like Notre Dame was actually kind of a pretty dark church. Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois could be kind of dark, but then when you go to Saint-Germain-des-Prés, there's a lot of light. I really love the ones that have a lot of light. But right on the side is the chapel dedicated to Saint Geneviève, and it's really gorgeous. She was originally buried next door at the Abbey, next to Clovis and Clotilde. But of course, during the Revolution, her remains were taken because she was in this beautiful sarcophagus that was gold and covered with diamonds and rubies and everything. She was taken down to the Mint, where they took it all apart. Then they slowly walked her through the street to make sure that everybody saw that she died. Go back and listen to the episodes about why she's a patron saint and how she continued to save the people even long after she died. She was burned on November 21st, 1793 in front of the Hotel de Ville. Inside the chapel that was built in 1863, is kind of a big brass sarcophagus looking thing. Inside of it has a huge stone, like 4 or 5 different pieces. They believe that is what her body rested on when she was buried at the Abbey. When they were tearing it down, they found these, and they think that was part of her tomb. So that's why these are there. But there is a reliquary there with her, which I know it always cracks you up because it's like a fingernail, but it's a little tiny vial that's some part of her body. And during the revolution, all those things that were in Paris were destroyed. But after she had died, some of these have been sent to churches all around France. And so after the revolution, they said, hey, bring those things back to us. So now, like Saint-Sulpice, Saint-Etienne, they all have some pieces of her. And these pieces, because of Saint-Geneviève, they would actually bring these things out, and they do this whole march, and they would do it when there was floods that would not stop. And then they'd do this whole ceremony, and then the rain would stop, or it was, they were having droughts, and then they do this, and then the sky would open up. So there were things that were happening. And also, I believe, because then the rooster that was on top of the spire of Notre Dame, inside that rooster was a relic of Saint-Geneviève, and also Saint-Denis, and also a piece of the true cross. And when that fell, because the spire, burned and the lead melted, and that's what broke through the ceiling, I believe that Notre Dame was saved because Saint-Geneviève was over it and watching.
She was protecting, like always.
She is. She's been protecting Paris for over 1,600 years. Inside, when you go into the chapel, it's really cool. There's the stained glass. Do not miss the stained glass. There's 3 different sections of stained glass. On the right is the ones that basically it shows the Church of Saint Etienne next to the Abbey in the stained glass, and then it shows kind of basically the procession when they did her reliquary and they walk it. And when they would do this, listen to that episode we did, and I tell you about how they did it, and it's really interesting. But on the other side is 2 huge section windows, and each one of them has 4 sections, and it tells a different story. So the first one tells of her childhood in Nanterre, when the Saint-Germain called her up for service. It also has her healing her mother's blindness, which was her first miracle. The third was when she received the veil dedicated to the virgins that she was asked to protect in Paris. And then 4th is her version of hell and paradise that she had in a dream. In the second window, it has her feeding the people of Paris under Childric, because she ended up getting its boat and navigating down the Seine that was all blocked off to go to Brie to bring back bread and wheat to feed the people. The next one is her kind of her most famous thing she's known for is asking the Parisians to pray at the banks of the Seine to fend off Attila the Hun, who was going to come destroy it. The 7th is the miracle of the relit candle when she was at the Basilique Saint-Denis, which is what she had built in memory of Saint-Denis. And the last one is her death, which was either in 502 or 512 is when she died.
Wow. I mean, how do these things survive? Like, it's crazy how.
It is crazy. I mean, when you go up there, this vial is probably 2 inches long. And I don't even know what's inside of it. It's like, it could literally be like, part of a joint in your finger, your pinky finger.
Yeah. Like, wow.
Yeah. But it's, and the Pope John Paul, there's a picture of him. He came there and like prayed there. But I mean, it's a beautiful church, and go all the way around. The stained glass windows are gorgeous. All of the little chapel, there's some great paintings in there that we talked about in that episode, which I'll put a link on my website to listen back to those too. And I've had people are like, you should do a podcast episode about her. When I do tours, I'm like, oh no, we did too. There's so much to talk about for her. We had to do too. But another really cool thing just right on that corner is when you walk down the street that basically where the Abbey used to sit, that ran through it now is the Rue Clovis, which is of course named after the King of the Franks. It was created in 1807. That's when they destroyed the Abbey and took it down. The Lycée Henri IV is there that has the tower inside of it. But if you go down a little bit, there's a really cool reminder of what Paris was long ago. A portion of the wall of Philippe Auguste he had created when he went on his third crusade. This was built between 1200 and 1215. Later, the Charles V wall was mostly was created, and a lot of the Philip Auguste was destroyed. But there's still a few pieces around. You could find some in Paris. You could find some in the Marais. You could find some at the carousel entrance of the Louvre. A few of the pieces that remain that are in the Marais are at the edge of a basketball court, which is really kind of cool, where I'm always like, do those guys playing basketball know what they're playing next to?
No idea.
But there's part of it that's right there on Rue Clovis, and it has a plaque there, and it's it's really interesting to see, because you can see just how thick that wall was. And it goes back into somebody's, into their backyard.
Wild. Oh my gosh. This is crazy, because you look at this pile of rocks and you're like, oh, that's nothing, you don't imagine like
not in Paris. There was a piece of it. There still is a piece there in a parking garage on the Rue Mazarine over in Saint-Germain, and I used to love to take people to show them, and like sometimes usually they just thought I was going down to get my car or something, and so I would take people down there, and one time somebody stopped me, and then I was like, oh no, we're going down to show, and there's even a plaque there saying what it is, and then the parking attendant was like, what are you talking about? And I gave him a history lesson. But they now have changed the parking lot into a private parking lot. So it's not just open to the public. So the door is never open now. So I can't take people down there.
Can't sneak in anymore.
Can't sneak in there anymore, sadly. But it is pretty cool. And you can find them, around the city. There's also right there on the Rue Saint-André des Arts. There's some, and the little shops that are right off the street. There's a few pieces of the wall. So there's, and there's books that are in French that basically have all of the different walls and kind of give you the map of where they used to be. And it's kind of fun to go like, I'm going to go find all the ones here on the left bank.
I love that. You need to make a map.
Yeah. There's quite a few online.
Check out those maps, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in, and make sure you head over to ClaudineHemingway.com to check out what Claudine's working on and connect with her, and tune in next week.
Thanks for listening today, guys. If you're interested in learning more about Claudine, her tours, history, and the beautiful photographs that she posts all over Instagram, tune into her website, ClaudineHemingway.com.